Good afternoon, and welcome to the ELGL Homelessness Policy Summit. And you're joining our last session of the day, featuring Ray, Trotta, and Jason Dedrick from the City of Eugene. My name is Kirsten Wyatt, and I'm the Executive Director of the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network, or ELGL. We're a big tent local government organization that connects, communicates, and educates about a variety of local government topics, and today is no exception. Without fail, we hear from our members that their city and county organizations are seeking better solutions to address homelessness in their communities. As ELGL strives to be topical and relevant, we want to bring together some of the best minds working on this policy issue in local government, and using this webinar platform allows our members nationwide to learn from them. Before I begin, I want to let you know that your microphones and conference phones are muted, and this makes the webinar enjoyable and efficient for everyone. After the presentation is finished, we will open up for questions, and these may be submitted using the chat box on the left-hand side of the screen, and Ray Trotta from Trotta Consulting will moderate them for our presenters, of which she is one. I'd also like to thank Strategic Government Resources, or SGR, for their partnership, which has given us the ability to record our webinars so you can watch them later and share with your colleagues from our webinar library. We will compile a record of all of the tweets from the webinar, as well as the recording and the slide decks used by our presenters, and we'll post all of those things on elgl.org for your review and sharing. As always, we'll be live tweeting today's webinar, and you can follow along using the hashtag ELGL Summit, and please be sure to use the Twitter handles for our participants. And with that, I want to hand it over to Ray Trotta, our moderator for today's event. She is a policy consultant on homelessness, and she's the ELGL member who first proposed today's agenda. If your organization is looking for strategic guidance on homelessness solutions, please reach out to Ray, and you can find her online at raytrotta.com.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Ray. I'm calling in from Portland today, and I was the moderator for this event. If any of you got the chance to sign in for each of the sessions, awesome job. You hopefully learned a lot, and hopefully we can continue some of these great conversations we've started. I had the pleasure of moderating. We talked to some interesting folks. We talked to City of Seattle about substance use and intersections between homeless and unsheltered homeless populations. And then we got to talk to San Francisco about their much talked about San Francisco Navigation Center and the benefits and successes of low barrier approaches to addressing homelessness. Recently, we talked with San Rafael, and they talked to us about a lot of different things, some really good history and some really different and good approaches to working with homeless populations in different ways, including humanistic views on panhandling and how to hire and focus on homelessness in your city, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these sessions are recorded, so we hope that you check back in with them. And again, we just want to acknowledge that this is a really big topic, and not all of us are subject matters in the field. I happen to be, and I really like this work. And I'll explain, my background and where I come from. But I just want to let you know that wherever you are in this journey, we thank you for joining in the conversation. They're a tough, it's a tough topic essentially, and I know that some of you come to learn best practices or refine your thinking, and some of you are here for the first time. So you're all welcome, and hopefully this chat helps answer some more questions about doing this work. So as Kirsten mentioned, this presentation stemmed from a presentation Jason and I gave at ELGL PBX pop-up conference. And we talked about criminalization, approaches to criminalization that are different, obviously. And then we also talked about some of the process that City of Eugene has gone through in looking at strategy and research around homelessness. So I'm going to start off again with my background. As Kirsten mentioned, I am an independent consultant specializing in community engagement and homelessness. I do this work from a background of public health and also direct social service. So my experience is working directly with folks experiencing homelessness and other marginalization in health and housing and assessment to get folks into permanent supportive housing. I've done most of my work here in Portland at Outside In Medical Center, which some of you have maybe heard of. And then in the left-hand corner here is a picture of Bud Clark Commons, which is a permanent supportive housing building here in Portland, which has had great success. So if you are looking into permanent supportive housing, I definitely recommend looking at Bud Clark Commons and learning from their past history. So this is not my quote, but I read this book this summer. I tell my story not because it is unique, but because it is not. Malala I don't know how to say her last name, sorry. But I use this quote because I think it's important when we talk about homelessness to recognize that it is not unique and it really shouldn't be normalized as something that just happens and should happen, should continue growing in our communities. So the way in which I work with cities and the way in which all the presenters really at this summit talk today is really that we can address homelessness in effective manners, and we can take new approaches that I think will have great community impact. So that's what we're going to focus on today, and that's always the approach that I bring from my work. I also think when I work on this topic that it's really, really important to root our work in the voice of homeless individuals and the experience of homeless individuals. So coming from direct service, I know why I do this work. I know it. I do this work because I know I know from folks who experience homelessness what this experience is like. It's not easy. It's not pretty a lot of the time, and it's not something that that folks want to be in, and it's not something that a position that folks are choosing. So I'm going to read this quote, and it hopefully can root us again in this conversation. There is nothing I fear more than being homeless again. I grew up in a household of fear and have survived several forms of abuse. I have been addicted to opiates. I have been incarcerated. I have had to fight for my literal survival on a lot of different occasions. I have hitchhiked across America and lost everyone I loved at one point. My life has had more than fair share of frightening moments, but nothing scares me nearly as much as homelessness. Even now, when I sleep, I cannot dream of anything happy. All my dreams are terrifying, and the reoccurring theme is memories from when I was without a home, without a place to hope, a place where I could feel safe. Life is difficult enough, and without a place to stay, without ever feeling safe, life is not only empty and lonely, but terrifying. When one has nowhere to go, how can one really get anywhere? This is a quote from a piece called Homelessness is Only One Piece of My Puzzle, and it's a great collaboration out of Canada that I really recommend if folks are looking into different models of community engagement and how to record what your communities are experiencing. It's a powerful piece, and I like it a lot. So today we're going to talk about criminalization and the impacts of homelessness across our communities. And then differing approaches that are more constructive to addressing homelessness. And I like to root us again in the numbers. So point-in-time counts, as you know, happen in communities across the country, usually 1 to 2 times a year. And at current, in 2015, the latest point-in-time count that came out, we had 564,000 folks nationwide experiencing homelessness. And across the nation, 31% of those individuals are unsheltered. And unsheltered means people who are sleeping outside in a vehicle or other place not intended for human habitation. So as you can imagine, and as you well know, I'm sure, unsheltered individuals face additional vulnerabilities. And again, you're city and county folks, so you really know that a lot of the times that the city stress or the stress that a community, businesses, neighbors, etc., experience around homelessness, it really is with this unsheltered population. So that's why we're looking at those numbers. I come from Oregon, and I'm talking with Jason, who works in Oregon. He's a policy analyst there. We have 13,000 folks in Oregon experiencing homelessness, and our number is a little bit bigger than the national average, 56% unsheltered. And as we all know, that number also is likely a little bit low. It's probably higher than that because folks who are unsheltered are those communities that are harder for us to access in the counts and harder for us to nail down exactly how many people are experiencing the state. So again, rooting us in the numbers, homelessness has gotten more and more heat and more talked about in the media and in all communities. And this is from the Huffington Post, prioritizing homeless veterans. Are we giving up on ending all homelessness? And we talk a lot about that issue of, are we ending homelessness? Are we addressing homelessness? And what are we up to? So a researcher in California looked at a span of about 13 years between 2000 and 2013. And in those numbers, he found that we've had a 14% reduction in homelessness. And if we look at the current numbers over the past 5 years and subtract veterans from that number, and again, veterans being a population that we have focused on in a large scale, and we've had great successes. So we've housed a lot of veterans. So we take out veterans from the number, and over the past 5 years, we've only decreased homelessness by 8%. So hopefully everyone can understand that we're not doing enough currently, and our systems aren't aligning enough to alleviate homelessness at a greater rate, a rate that would help us end homelessness, or at least prevent homelessness in, this number says, before 88 years. So at our current rate, we're going to end homelessness in 88 years. So that's just not going to work, and hopefully we can do better. So today, I wanted to give a background on criminalization, just because I think that it's important to recognize, as you cities and counties are looking at strategies to alleviate homelessness and address homelessness, I think it's very important to look at your own history with the issue, and whether or not you've had a negative or a positive impact on the community with regard to this issue, because it's going to impact your task forces, your research, your new programs. Your history is going to impact that, and if it has a negative impact, it is important to analyze that, be transparent, and try to move forward in a new light. So this is a background that's the previous presentation San Rafael went into a little bit, and he talked about the decentralization of funding and responses to homelessness. So since about the 1970s, when federal housing expenditures really basically stopped going up, and we weren't supporting affordable housing in the way we used to, the onus was pushed on to states, and now the main folks who are looking at addressing homelessness are local municipalities, as you know and well feel. We also talked about in all of the presentations that we have fractured systems of care. So we have those within our communities, and then we have them across the nation. You're going to get different care maybe down the block, and then maybe in the next state over, you're going to get different care if you're a person experiencing homelessness. And all of this has resulted in cities responding with criminalizing homelessness at the local level. I think it's felt the easiest approach, and without much funding or knowledge about how to have a more humanistic approach, a lot of folks have kind of cracked down homelessness in a way that has had negative impacts across our communities. So I'm going to go over this very quickly, but criminalization is basically any prohibition of life-sustaining activities. So if you ban sleeping, ban panhandling, ban sit-lie ordinances, ban basic survival methods that folks use who are homeless, that's what it means when we criminalize homelessness. So in my opinion, and I think it was in all of the sessions prior, criminalization is very expensive. We use a lot of funds to respond to homelessness, but we're really not alleviating its impact. It's counterproductive. It isolates individuals. So folks who we're trying to reach with services, we've isolated them enough that they are no longer coming to our services. It's also becoming more and more of a tactic that is illegal. So it's no longer something that is going to be the easiest and quickest method for folks to address homelessness with. So again, this is just proof that communities need more support. That's why you all are here today, and that's what we're going to chat with more about with City of Eugene. So constructive alternatives, I look at it in kind of 4 buckets. There's employment, alternative shelter, positive engagement, and then permanent supportive housing. So we all know that our ultimate goal is to get folks into housing, and then in intermediate areas, we need to support folks to have incomes to be able to support themselves to live. We need to support folks where they are at, so offer low barrier shelters that accepts people in their experience of homelessness, in their trauma, in perhaps current addictions, current mental health crisis. We need to be able to meet those folks where they're at and get them into systems so we can start to get them out of some of the patterns that lead to chronic homelessness. And again, positive engagement, we always lead with that to make sure that our efforts are the most effective as possible. So our presentation today is going to be mostly a chat. So basically, I'm going to interview Jason Dedrick from City of Eugene, who I get to work with on different projects around homelessness and around how his city will define their role to address homelessness at the community level. And I'll let Jason introduce himself. I always forget his job title because he's one of those great people that does a million different jobs. So Jason, if you want to chime in, introduce yourself, and then we can get started with our questions.
Great. Ray, I'd like to confirm that you can hear me. Can you hear me? Good afternoon. This is Jason Dedrick. I want to check in with you, Ray, make sure that you can hear me.
We can hear you, Jason.
Fantastic. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. As Ray mentioned, my title is sometimes difficult to nail down. I am a senior policy analyst with the city manager's office in the City of Eugene, and one of the functions that our office provides is support to the entire organization, and that becomes even more critical on these tricky issues that tend to cross an organization. So oftentimes in my role, I'm deployed to projects that are in need of capacity or that are in need of connections across the organization. And so I think in some respects, I represent those of you out there who may be working on the issue of homelessness but aren't experts in homelessness. It's certainly not my background nor an area that I've worked in a whole lot before the last few years. And so I think that role that I'm in kind of, I can empathize with those of you who, for whom it's not your primary job duty as it is in a lot of our cities, and just trying to find ways to get the work done. So that's kind of what I do. Right now we have sort of a team of folks in the city manager's office that are acting as sort of the lead on homelessness, but none of us is necessarily identified as, quote, the lead on homelessness in our community.
Great. Thanks, Jason. So I started working with Jason and the City of Eugene. I actually realize now it was around a healthy downtown effort. They were looking at a smoke-free downtown area. And when I joined in on the project, I immediately noticed that there was a large intersection between the concerns about smoking in the downtown area and homeless individuals being the people who were perceived as being the ones smoking. And that didn't end up matching up, but that's how I ended up working on homelessness in the City of Eugene. And since that project, I've worked on a couple different things with them. One, which we're going to talk about, which was an organizational assessment to look at the internal impacts of homelessness on the City of Eugene, which other cities have also noted in their sessions that homelessness, of course, isn't only addressed or impacting the one person who's assigned to homelessness or the 10 to 20 people who are assigned to homelessness in any one city, but it's really impacting all of your departments and a lot of different staff across the board. So today I wanted to talk to Jason again about his experience at the City of Eugene of working on this topic. And I wanted to start out by talking about the issue of criminalization. And I talk about criminalization because I think it's important to root us in the history of an approach that was looked as the go-to for about 30 years. And now we are moving away from that approach and looking at interacting with community more, interacting with coalitions more, and bringing more people in to address the issue of homelessness. So Jason, if you wouldn't mind just sharing a little bit about that word and that subject in your community and yeah, how you guys move forward with that.
Sure. I think with a lot of communities, we have struggled with that move sort of out of the long history of what has been called criminalization. And we struggle with that term, even using that term in our community. I think coming out of the Occupy movement several years ago, the city started to become more proactive around moving away from criminalization. And then as members of the community or folks outside of our community continued to sort of, I guess, advocate or have advocacy around the fact that the city was criminalizing homelessness, our our Eugene Police Department, as well as our Human Rights Commission, began to push back with the community and said, well, let's wait a minute here. There are things that we're doing that are really trying to move us away from that. And so interestingly, it has caused sensitivity around even using that word within our organization, and it is a word that we try to use less of, simply because we feel like we're making that turn. However, it doesn't mean that we don't still have work to do. I mean, we still do have in our city code an ordinance that prohibits camping in public right-of-ways, parks, and other publicly owned property. And I think the distinction that we make is that our community is one that has a deep tradition of equity and human rights running across all of the work that we do, both internal to our organization and our community. Our Human Rights Commission is seen as a leader on these issues nationally, and so I really think what it meant was bringing that long tradition of equity and human rights to the issue of homelessness for our community. And so, for example, even though we have that prohibition in our code, there are different ways that we enforce that or not enforce that. It's a very hands-off, complaint-driven approach. We have attempts to have positive engagement with everyone that may be in violation of that ordinance. So equipping our police department, all of our first responders with all the tools they need to help connect individuals experiencing homelessness with the services in our community. Our city council has taken strides to designate areas where camping is legal. We can talk a little bit more about that, but in terms of our temporary options, there are several different options out there, so that when we do encounter those issues and when what's traditionally seen as a criminalization approach comes into play in terms of closing down camps or moving people on, we really attempt to do that in a way that sort of evokes our principles of equity and human rights. So again, it continues to be an issue that I think we're sensitive to, but I guess I would say sensitive in a constructive way. I think in any issue, when we push at the edges of it and things make us uncomfortable, those are the places where I think we know we need to be doing better on. And I think that's been our approach, sort of to embrace that, yeah, there are things that we can do to improve on that front.
Great. And I think obviously you're not alone in that. A lot of folks are in a space probably where their books, quote unquote, their ordinances might differentiate from some of the programs that they're starting to roll out. And I think, again, someone earlier mentioned advocacy and pragmatism as being a good partnership in this work. And I think that I don't talk about criminalization to point fingers at anyone, but I do think it's important for all of us to look at our different histories of approaches. And we have to acknowledge what is happening or what has happened to be able to evaluate its outcome. And I think Eugene is good at that in terms of recognizing different ways of moving forward and acknowledging the different impacts that work has. So my second question is coming from a lot of the questions I get when I present this work. And again, we're talking with Eugene, who doesn't have a dedicated department on homelessness yet. Is that correct, Jason?
That is correct, yes.
So I got this question from a lot of folks, and I'm going to pose it back to you. How do you work with your council, and how do you convince them sometimes to do things that haven't been their top priority around addressing homelessness?
Sure, and I think, obviously these questions of working with the council depend to some degree on what your form of governance is. We have a city manager form of governance, so essentially, the council hires the city manager. It's his role to implement the policy direction that the council sets. I think that some of the struggles and lessons learned that we've had in terms of working with council, I think one of the big ones has been what can be sort of the seasonality of the issues around homelessness. So oftentimes the issue gets more attention in the community as winter weather approaches. And the challenge there is that, as I think in many communities, the council deliberation process can be quite long. And so beginning to talk about, for example, ramping up winter strategies or anything to address the issue of homelessness, if we begin that at the council level in, let's say October or November, it can take months to move through the council work session process, their decision process, the staff's ability to get them the information they need to make decisions. And by the time we're moving forward on something, the weather's improving and the community attention around the issue starts to wane a little bit. Of course, we know the issue is important year-round. And so I think one of the things that we're attempting to do is to bring the issue to the forefront throughout the year, to make connections with the various parts of our organization that are kind of routinely reporting to council on their efforts, how homelessness is a part of the work that they are doing, that it's not sort of let's have a work session on homelessness. There are many things that we do as an organization where homelessness is important. So for example, when our community development staff are talking about their efforts around affordable housing, when our park operations staff are updating council on parks planning and operations, when our facilities staff are talking about the things that they're doing in our downtown core or around our other facilities, all of those are opportunities for staff to keep the issue of homelessness at the forefront for council. And it sort of goes hand in hand with, I think, the challenge that we all face in kind of an era where information is everywhere, where our counselors are inundated with information in a way that is not like how it used to be in the past. In the past, councils would often receive much of their information from their staff. And now, of course, they can receive their own information or pursue their own information online. Their constituents are constantly bombarding them with their own information. And so the ability for staff to find effective ways to communicate with council at all levels becomes critical outside of the work session format. So I think we're trying to find ways to get information to them that are helpful for the decision-making process that they need to undertake. And I think the other, kind of another key point around working with council is trying to identify what our community's role, what our organization's role is with homelessness in our community. And so with council as the entity that sets the policy direction and staff as the group that are implementing that, it becomes even more critical that we get clear direction from council, and that I think we challenge them to make sure they're giving us the clear direction we need to go out there and do the things that our community wants us to do. And so again, I think, and in part of the work that we've been exploring with Ray is trying to identify in the universe of entities that are working on homelessness in our community, what is the proper role for our organization, the City of Eugene, as it relates to other organizations, and then developing the policy guidance around that role, which then allows staff to be able to implement that guidance. So I think those few things become what is really critical in how to work effectively with a council that, let's face it, has 20 different hot issues at any given time, and as important as homelessness is, it's difficult to bring them up to speed on things quickly in a way that can help them make their decisions.
Definitely. And I think, you mentioned it in a lot of your points, but just looking at this topic, obviously, as an investment, and homelessness wasn't created overnight, and we can't solve it overnight, and we really have to look at how can we break it up into smaller pieces, and like you said, keep that thread throughout all the different work, so we still feel like we're cohesively working on a plan moving forward.
Yeah, in some ways it becomes, go ahead, Ray.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say in some way it becomes how we have begun to look at things like sustainability or equity and human rights. It becomes a lens through which we look at all of our work. And so I think that's the challenge we're attempting to move, or that we have and that we're attempting to move towards with homelessness, is to sort of keep it at the forefront and have it be an active thought of everything that we do, all of our operations as an organization.
So my next question talks about ebb and flow of this work, and I realized that the last presentation with San Rafael, they pointed out, their experience of hiring a dedicated director of homelessness planning, I think was the name of that position, and that probably is a combat to ebb and flow of homelessness on the agenda. But for folks who don't yet have a position like that or aren't considering that approach, do you have a commentary on how this work can come in and out of interest and in and out of, immediate approach?
Yeah, I think definitely over the past few years experienced the ebb and flow of the work. I think, I mentioned the seasonality of it. There are, as the community engages in different ways, or as different, for lack of a better term, activist groups kind of get activated around certain issues related to homelessness, it ends up creating an ebb and flow where for a short period of time or a medium period of time, we'll be working kind of feverishly on the issue, and then as things cool off, we're not working on it as much. And I think in some small way, that's a function of sort of just limited budgets, limited capacity that all of our organizations face. And where do you put those resources when you just don't have that? And what it ends up, you end up getting in a responsive kind of frame of mind. And I think we're trying to move away from that. In that responsive role, what ends up happening is, the work all, and not only does it get addressed in a responsive way that's not as proactive as it could be, but it tends to get addressed by the staff that have the capacity, or in some respects, it's often the staff that have the least capacity to be working on it, and so it doesn't get the attention that it should. So I think we're at that place as an organization where we're trying to build a more consistent team around homelessness. We had a good experience with the First Lady's Challenge around veterans homelessness. Last year, we created a 12-month position to work solely on veterans homelessness, and we learned a lot there, and we learned what we can do with a dedicated resource. And so we moved on to create another position now. That one sunset, but we've created another 12-month position around homelessness in particular. I think in some respects to be both a conduit for inside of our organization. So as anyone inside of our organization is interfacing with the community, being able to have consistent information, knowing what's happening at the policy level. So this individual will help with that, but also being the go-to person for the community when they have questions. I think we're being very clear to say that this individual is not the policy lead on homelessness, because that's a trickier thing to designate a policy lead around that. For me personally, I think it would be my hope that we continue to increase our dedicated capacity around homelessness. As it is now, many staff from around the organization are spending, hundreds, if not thousands of hours a year. And I think one of the challenges can be, it's sort of the opportunity cost that is not often associated with the work that doesn't happen. So for example, we say, well, having additional positions would be expensive. But if you added up the FTE around our organization that are spent in a more reactive way, one could probably make the argument that that capacity is there. We just need to dedicate it a little more proactively. So, for example, in our Public Works Department has begun having all their employees code on their timesheets the time that they're spending on things that are specific to homelessness that otherwise they might not be doing. And it becomes a great way to sort of represent the cost, the true cost of an issue like this to an organization, and then with the hope of then being able to take that information to our council, to our community, and begin talking about what it takes to get the resources that we need. So I think we're trying to move out of that ebb and flow, have folks that are dedicated to this full-time throughout the year so that when things do pick up, we're ready to roll with, some dedicated staffing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that we've actually talked about this earlier today as well, but I think getting those numbers down for your community is really priceless, because if you can say, how much you spend per year on this issue, and then you can break it down to how much you spend in policing, how much you spend in cleanup, it really tells a clear story of where your priorities are currently and then where they could be potentially diverted if you had, some more integrated programs. So I think it's a definite best practice that folks should be looking into. So next question. Jason and I have gotten to work together on an organizational assessment, which again is basically an internal look at what the impact is across departments of homelessness in Eugene. And the way that came about, Jason, was you guys were looking originally at, can you explain where you were prior to us choosing the tool of organizational assessment?
I think that we were in a place where we were understanding that homelessness was having an impact on our staff, but not quite sure what the extent of that impact was. I think that we were searching for what our role was as an organization around the issue of homelessness. I think we were unsure of what the directions were on some of those things, and we wanted to seek someone outside of our organization who might be able to engage with our staff on a different kind of conversation about homelessness, about the work that they're doing, and also be able to, at some point look at what other communities are doing as well. I think what it was a realization that for as much as we know here in our community and we know of our organization, sometimes looking outside the organization is the best way to go when you're trying to say, time out, let's step back, take a look at this. Can we be organized differently as an organization around this? Can we be filling a niche in our community that perhaps we're unaware of as being a better niche for us? So I think those questions sort of drove the desire to do this work.
And I have the next slide here. We probably don't have a ton of time to go into this in detail, but if folks are interested in talking about this approach, please reach out to me. I'm happy to explain how it went in Eugene and different strategies of doing this work. These are just an example here of the framework that I used in those interviews that I did with kind of all different levels of folks in the police department, parks department, library, city manager's office, etc., to again document what is going on across the agency with regard to homelessness, and then some of the needs and some of the themes that come out of those conversations. And as the neutral third party who got to do the interviewing, I think one of the things I found most interesting about the process was how the overwhelming reception that the interviews got, and folks really, really, really wanted to talk. I think they just really liked having a space where they could talk about something that might not come up in all their different meetings or might not come up in their daily work, to be able to kind of unload about some of the frustrating things and some of the overwhelming things that they may not be trained on, but they are faced with every single day. So Jason, I don't know if you have further comment about that, but it was definitely a good experience for me to be able to participate in that and help put that information in a place that is actionable for City of Eugene.
I think I'll just touch briefly on a couple of things that we learned, because I think they might be really instructive for other communities, but I'll just kind of run through these quickly. But we learned the deep level of compassion that our staff have for those experiencing homelessness, much more so than we thought. I mean, we felt like we were pushing the ideas of equity and human rights and inclusion throughout our organization on other things, and I think what we found was that work was hugely beneficial when it came to the issue of homelessness. We also learned that with that compassion came what several of our staff referred to as compassion fatigue, just how difficult this work can be, how many of them didn't feel like this wasn't necessarily what they were hired to do. For example, like a parks maintenance worker did not feel like did not know they were going to be spending half their time interacting with folks experiencing homelessness, and just whether or not they were prepared for that. So it surfaced some issues around training, around what it means to provide our staff the support that they need to go out and do the work that they need to do. And I think we learned from our staff that they were looking for better communication and coordination in our organization, as well as more guidance, both at the staff level but also from the council level, really wanting to have better policy guidance or more clear policy guidance on what we were doing as an organization, and have that communicated to all of our staff, so that when they're out interfacing with the community, they made sure that they were talking about the right things and doing things the right way. And then, of course, a lot of our staff also asking, what is our role? As they're out there doing their work, they want to know that they're doing the best thing that they can do in the most effective way that they can. And so I think that it was great to hear from our staff that they too struggle with what our role is.
Yeah, great. And the last question that Jason and I will discuss before taking any questions from the audience. Jason, when we chatted about this, you asked me or wanted to talk about the topic of partnering with community and activist groups. Do you want to lead on that, and I can chime in however you would like?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think our first big kind of interface with the issue of homelessness from an activist level was really with the Occupy movement several years ago, and having a concentrated sort of voice in the community around the issue of homelessness. And I think we struggled with, what does it mean to be a local government trying to partner with activist groups who use different kind of tools and methods than, frankly, local government often uses to get things done. And I think what we've tried to do is develop a framework where we can help folks channel that energy into our systems and our structures to find ways to make it work. And so I think one of the great examples of that, although, as we continue our move towards permanent supported housing, that obviously is a long journey, and so we've been doing as much as we can with temporary housing. And so in many cases that has meant working with activist groups in the community to have them become the entities that manage and operate the camps in our rest stop program. So designated sites around the community where designated camps can occur. Those folks can get connected with services. It's a healthy, safe, kind of clean environment. And so really challenging our activist groups to be part of the solution and to work with us kind of through our structures to try to make sure that collaboratively together we're going where everyone would want to go. And I think that's been a challenge. It's often hard then to invite folks who will come and testify at council meetings and say, frankly, really nasty things about staff and our organization, and then to have to turn around and try to partner with those folks. I think that's always going to be the challenge in local government, and that's part of what we do. But I think we're trying to sort of turn the corner and do that as best we can, and I think we've made that move. And so now that many of other groups in our community that we would think of as activist groups have really become partner entities to try to address these issues in a really constructive, proactive way.
Yeah, I definitely, agree with you and can see across communities, probably there's a lot of tension in working with your activist groups. And I guess the feedback, or you already know it, but definitely just for everyone to always make sure that their community engagement is two directional, and that you can go in with it maybe admitting as much frustration or you feel stumped or something like that. You can go in admitting that you don't have all the answers as a city. You haven't necessarily always done it right. And I'm not speaking directly to City of Eugene, but really all of us in this issue. No one city has waved the magic wand and solved homelessness, so we can all come together over at least frustration. And that's kind of how I always like to work with folks when there is so much tension on different sides about how to work together on this issue. And with that, we have a little less than 15 minutes left, so Jason and I could probably chat all day, and we will continue to do so if we don't hear any questions from you guys. But please write in your questions to the chat box, or tweet them, or email them, or whatever medium you're using, and we're happy to address questions. I understand that our topics are kind of all over the place, so if you want to challenge us, go ahead, and we will do our best to either speak from experience or reference a resource if we know of one to answer your questions. While we're waiting for that, I should probably start us off with a question. Jason, is there any other topics that we didn't address that were brought up in this conversation that might be helpful to keep talking about?
I think that, a colleague of mine sat in on the previous presentation from San Rafael, and she mentioned that they were talking about the importance of not only finding dedicated staff around homelessness, but also empowering all of your staff. And I just wanted to pick up on that theme as something that I think is important for us, that oftentimes we will hear from our staff that, can you just dedicate some staff to this issue so that we can spend a little less time on it? And I think the message we are trying to send to our whole organization is that this is an issue that affects our entire organization, and no matter how much dedicated staffing we may put in around homelessness, we need to empower all of our staff to feel that this is not side work or extra work, that this is the work of our organization on an issue that is central to our community. And so I think it's a dual message. Yes, we want to increase our dedicated staffing, but we also want to empower all staff to feel as though this is part of their primary work, and then also to support them with the tools they need to do that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I recall that statement as well from the previous presentation about empowering your staff. And I definitely think one of the elements of that is just transparency, again, about acknowledging what what different folks are experiencing across the agency, acknowledging what maybe the top level staff are dealing with in terms of trying to figure out one strategy to move forward, and just getting more people involved in the conversation, I think helps them feel more involved rather than isolated from a plan. We do have a question from Twitter. It says, on the concept of seasonality, how do you convince your council that homelessness is an important topic, even in the middle of the summer?
I think that for us, a great analogy, and probably for many communities, well, I'm not sure, but oftentimes right around mid-June, the issue of fireworks comes up, and enforcement or a ban on fireworks. And, not every community faces that, but that is something that comes up here in Eugene. And what typically ends up happening is, as that issue comes up, all of the council's work sessions for the coming weeks are already filled, and they have to bump things off to try to slot in some discussions around fireworks. And what inevitably ends up happening is the conversation gets shortened. Staff don't have the ability to pull together information as quickly as council needs it. And oftentimes they end up not being able to take the action the community might want them to take in time to do that before the 4th of July. And so I think one of the tools that we have used kind of behind the scenes is to remind council of how long it can often take them to work on an issue. Not in a bad way, but just as a reminder to say, remember when we picked up this issue, to do your work as effectively as you wanted to do it, it took you 6 work sessions across 3 months. And so that, I think, reminding them of how their process works, and just reminding them that it's often slower than they remember it was, or that to do it ideally would take a little longer, and from a staff perspective, that to staff them in the way we would want to with the best information, it takes a little more time. And I think that is helpful for them to kind of push back against the seasonality issue and to pick up on issues that seem sort of out of season. And I think the other thing I'll touch on again that I mentioned earlier is really bringing homelessness to our council as part of other projects throughout the year. And again, so that it's not seen as sort of a separate issue, but an issue that's sort of woven into all of the work that we do. So it's not an update per se on homelessness. We're here to talk today about park operations, and in doing that, they spend a little time talking about the impact of homelessness. So I think those are a few things that we do to work with our council to sort of push against the seasonality of homelessness or other issues.
Yeah, definitely. And just from a public health perspective, I just want to make clear that we're not promoting in any means that homelessness is a seasonal issue, because it really isn't. But I think the way in which that word is being used is more to just say it can get bumped, obviously, for other political or city priorities. And also from a consulting perspective, I would just encourage folks to stick with it, because I think I've heard from a lot of communities that they get very close. Basically, they have a lot of work sessions on, I don't know, say a rest stop or a legal way of camping or having an encampment in your community. And then things get too heated and they let it rest. They let their council breathe a little, and they let everyone relax over all the tension that was created. From a long-term strategy perspective, I think if every time this issue gets heated, if we let it rest, we're not going to get anywhere. So unfortunately, I would challenge folks to kind of work through the heatedness and keep it on the agenda, because I do think if you wait for a full season to come back to the issue, you're probably going to have to reinvent the wheel, have the same conversations you already had, and I don't think it's the most effective use of elected official time. Let's see, I think another question wrote in. Could you talk more about employee morale when it comes to dealing with homelessness issues when it's perceived to be outside of their purview? You mentioned the compassion of Eugene employees. That's great. How have you built out that workplace culture?
I would say we're probably in the middle of that. So this came up through the work that Ray did in terms of interviewing a subset of our employees. And I think what we learned was we had already done some things as an organization that were supporting our staff and supporting their morale in terms of having equity and human rights be part of everything that we do as an organization, really working with work-life balance, some of the other trainings that we offer regularly as an organization around things like crucial conversations or conflict management, things that we might think of as more workplace issues have become tools in the toolbox that are helpful for staff when they're out there encountering people experiencing homelessness. But what we surfaced through the work with Ray was that we had more work to do around that. So for example, in an organization such as ours that has around 1,500 staff, it's easy to feel as though you're kind of in your silo around homelessness in whatever work group or department you're in. And so one of the things that we've identified that will be helpful to kind of boost morale is for staff to understand that other staff in the organization are experiencing the same issues they are, to make connections around that, to be sharing information and best practices around that. I think that we're learning that our staff need more training around the issue of dealing with people experiencing homelessness, people experiencing mental health issues. We have heard from our staff that they don't feel prepared to interact with individuals who are in those situations. So we're going to be ramping up our trainings specifically to be centered around dealing with individuals who are in crisis. So I think that that's something we're doing. Something as simple as having staff from our office, the city manager's office, or from other parts of the organization go out and see the issue of homelessness through the lens of other work groups. So for example, having staff going out and working on park cleanups, working with our facilities crew who are dealing with issues downtown, going out and doing ride-alongs with our police or fire employees or first responders. I think those are things that we need to do and that we're going to be doing more of to kind of create a culture that we're sort of all together on this, we're all in on this, and that we are compassionate for each other and the issues that we're facing. So there's more that we need to do, but I think half the battle is understanding the depth of, I guess, the compassion fatigue, for lack of a better term, that our staff were feeling, and the importance of that morale and how it was impacting their other work. So there's more work for us to do, but I guess I would encourage everyone to explore having those conversations with your staff if you haven't, just because it's easy to kind of gloss over the impact that it might be having.
Yeah, and I would just add that from a social service perspective, for those of us who've worked in direct service or work currently in direct service with those experiencing homelessness, we really can't do our work without thorough support, and we can't do our work without basically being able to lean on each other when it gets hard and talk about our experiences because it's not always easy. And now we see more and more city employees dealing with things that they're probably not prepared for. So definitely supporting them in new ways, and maybe even bringing in some of those social service models of supervision, motivational interviewing, different trainings that gives people the tools to really deal with what they see all day long is really important to supporting your staff. So Kirsten, I think we're coming to the end. Feel free to jump on whenever you want. Folks, if you have any last minute questions, please write them into the chat box. And other than that, Jason, I just want to thank you so much for chatting with me today. I always really appreciate how honest you are and flexible in these conversations. And it's fun to work with you on this stuff. And for everybody listening, thanks so much for sticking with us.
Yeah, thank you, Ray. As you correctly note, we have come to the end of today's webinar and also the end of today's summit on homelessness. And so I want to first thank both you and Jason for this presentation, and then also all of our presenters for all of the learning and information they provided for us today. And a special thanks to Ray Trotta for her moderation of today's event. Without Ray's help, this event wouldn't have happened, and I think we covered a lot of ground today, and it's because of Ray. So thank you for everything you've done for the ELGL audience. For our members, thank you all for participating and sharing your time with ELGL. And as a reminder, we have recorded this webinar, and it will be available online soon at elgl.org. You could also reference the hashtag ELGL Summit on Twitter to review and share your thoughts from the discussion. And so with that, I'll end the webinar. And again, thank you for sharing your day with ELGL, and thank you for your support of our organization.